Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Volunteer Fire Council's 2018 Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Application Tips webinar. We thank you for attending and look forward to answering any questions you may have following today's presentation. Today's presenter, Mr. David Lewis, is an active member of the Odenton Volunteer Fire Company with over 45 years as a firefighter, EMT, past chief officer, and company president. David is an adjunct instructor with the National Fire Academy, the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, and the University of Maryland. He is a past president of the Anne Arundel County Volunteer Firefighters Association and of the Maryland State Firemen's Association. David is also active at the regional and national level as a director to both the Cumberland Valley Volunteer Firemen's Association and the National Volunteer Fire Council. He has delivered training programs and conference presentations across more than 20 different states. As an emergency services educator, Mr. Lewis is able to apply his life experiences in an environment that shares with others and builds future leadership across the emergency services communities. David?
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone. This is now our second segment of the grant programs update. We were just with you a little bit over a month ago as we went through the Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program. We'll now be presenting the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program update, and probably somewhere shortly after the first of the year, we'll be able to present one on the SAFER program. You should be able to see my screen. The contact information is right there in the center, and I'll bring that back up again at the end of the program in case you wanted to contact me with any questions afterwards. Additionally, if you would like to have, rather than scribble down a whole bunch of notes, if you'd like to have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, just jot me an email after the presentation is over with, and I'd be glad to forward that out to you. So with that, we'll move on. I see that we have, let's see, we're about 56 participants online, so we'll move on. So as I said, this is the second of three of the grant program updates. The Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program just recently closed a little bit over a month ago now, funded at $315 million. The SAFER program also is funded at $350 million. We'll start somewhere after January, and those actually become the two funding lines, the AFG funding line and the SAFER funding line. 10% of the $350 million assigned to AFG gets spun off to the Fire Prevention and Safety Program, and that's what we're in right now. So that application period opened on November the 12th, and will close on December 21st, and there's $35 million available in that funding line. Everything you need to know and want to know is available on the FEMA.gov/firegrants website, but I'm going to highlight many of the things that you need to consider as you're putting in the application. Let's start with the purpose. What is the purpose of the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program? And as you see here on the screen, is to enhance the safety of the public and the firefighters with respect to fire and fire-related hazards by assisting fire prevention programs and supporting firefighter health and safety research and development. So there's actually two pieces. You're going to see that. Assisting fire prevention programs, that's what most of us are going to be concerned with as fire department representatives. The second part, there's a lot of research that goes on supporting health and safety. We're not going to talk a lot about those because the focus of our discussion today with the grant program is going to be talking how do we help fire departments apply for the fire prevention and safety grant programs under the FP&S grant program for fire prevention in their communities. Let's kind of take a look back first where we were in last year's program, fiscal year 2017. I did some quick math, and the numbers may not be precise, but looking at the spreadsheet from FEMA, there were 119 awards last year to allocate that $35 million, just under $35 million. There's always some overhead that goes with any of these programs. The FP&S part of it, the part that we're most concerned with, was 112 of those 119 awards for about $26 million of the money. The research and development, those are usually $1 million or better, as you can see. There were only 7 awards, but that was $8 million of the money. In the fire department, when we talk about fire departments, that's under the FP&S stuff, we got about 70% of those 112 awards and about 25% of the dollars. So again, you look at a number of national and larger organizations do apply under the research and development as well as the fire prevention and safety grant program. But again, it's not shabby that, we get some good awards out of this for for working fire prevention issues throughout your community. As I said, the grant supports two major activities, and I highlighted fire prevention and safety activity because that's the one that we're going to focus on today. That's the one that most of you, I'm gathering, would be interested in. And it's kind of looking at the fire prevention, looking at who is high risk target groups, and minimize the incident, mitigate the incident of death, injuries, and property damage by fire-related hazards. That's all the fire prevention stuff that we do as fire departments throughout our communities. The other half of that is the research and development, and a lot of good stuff that is coming out of that in the research arena. But again, we're not going to focus on that part as part of this presentation today. So if we look at the fire prevention and safety grant area itself, who is eligible for that? And you see fire departments is highlighted there because that's who we're targeting today with this presentation. But you also recognize that national organizations such as the National Volunteer Fire Council, regional, your state associations, some local associations, nonprofit organizations are all eligible. That are recognized for their expertise and experience in fire prevention and safety programs. And so that has to do with both private and not public nonprofit organizations. So you are competing out there with that, but don't be disillusioned by that. You have to address the fire prevention and life safety considerations in your community, and there are plenty of grant opportunities out there. The fire departments get a good enough portion of these funds that you should consider yourself as eligible and want to be out here competing for whatever needs you're trying to meet. This is the fire safety and research development, and again, I'll just highlight that fire departments are not eligible to do research and development. So let's look at fire prevention and safety activity. That's what we're talking about. Thinking about, who are the target groups in is it your public at large? Is it juveniles? Is it older folks? Is it folks that are in group housing? What is the high risk target area? Or maybe it's just a general population of your community, and that's okay too. But again, what we're looking at is, where is the highest risk, and what are you going to do? What actions are you going to take to mitigate and minimize death and injury caused by fire and fire-related hazards? And what it really comes down to is thinking about first, what have you done to think about putting together a comprehensive education program? And it's more than just being aware of the risk factors, but actually taking action onto it. And so it has a lot to do in order to kind of understand the knowledge of your risks, applying that knowledge, and ultimately having a behavior change for those in your community to accept those knowledge and skills. FEMA and the U.S. Fire Administration kind of look at that in a 5-step planning process. First, you have to conduct a community risk assessment. What are the risks in your community? Is it people lacking awareness of smoke alarms or sprinklers, or don't even have them? Is it juvenile fire centers? Is it dormitory settings if you live near a campus? So what are the risks that you have in your community? Or maybe even you live in a wildland. God bless the people in California right now and the issues that they're going with some of the wildland issues. So what is the risk? And then who are you going to partner with? You should never think about doing this alone. These grant opportunities build pretty much a lot on building partnerships with other community, whether it be your local homeowners association, the scout groups, the school groups, churches. Who's going to be your partner in developing this fire prevention and life safety program? And then what are you going to do to take intervention to address that risk that you identified in step one, through engineering, education, and enforcement, the 3 principal E's of fire prevention and life safety. Then developing a strategy, and then have a capability to evaluate the results. Now, these 5 steps are important because you're going to see some things come up later when we start talking about developing the narrative that are going to point directly to, what risk are you addressing? Who are you going to partner with? What is your strategy? What's your plan to implement that strategy? And how are you going to evaluate that strategy? So let's look at this. Fire prevention and safety basically has 4 project categories. Community risk reduction is going to be the big one for us, and I've highlighted that. And we'll probably, spend a few minutes more talking about that than the other ones. But they also can apply for grant opportunities under fire prevention and safety, under code enforcement and awareness, fire and arson investigation, and then again, national, state, and regional programs and studies. And we'll walk through each of those 4 because it's important that we walk through the 4. But keep in mind, for you, for most of us as fire departments, community risk reduction is where we're going to be focusing our efforts and our activities and our grant application. So let's look at what do we mean by community risk reduction? And according to FEMA, according to the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunities, working smoke alarms and residential sprinklers greatly reduce the risk of fire casualty for nation residents, says there. Therefore, the highest priorities for the community risk reduction area are smoke alarm installation. That means you purchase the smoke alarms and you actually physically go out and install those smoke alarms in people's houses. And maybe while you're there, do a little bit of awareness education, maybe do a safety walkthrough of their home, kind of give them some guidance on storage and things like that. The second one is sprinkler awareness. Residential sprinklers throughout this country. Sprinklers provide 24/7 firefighter protection, essentially in a home. And then risk assessment. Maybe you don't have that risk assessment, so maybe what you need to do is start with that risk assessment. And so we're going to touch on these are the priorities. You're going to see in each of these 4 areas that there are items that have been identified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity as priorities. Doesn't mean you can't apply for other things. It just means that these things will be tagged as priorities and get additional point consideration. And you'll see that when I get down a little bit later, we talk about some of the point scoring of your application. You'll see that the priority elements, such as the 3 listed here, get additional point consideration in community risk reduction. Here are some other things listed specifically in the NOFO. Now it says eligible but not a priority rating. That doesn't mean you can't apply for it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for it. It just means that it won't get that priority consideration in the scoring. And it's a little bit different for those that apply for Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program. We would tell you that if things are not a high priority, don't apply for it. In this case, I would say do apply for it. But again, think about the things that we list first as a priority item before you think about things that are less. So eligible but not a priority under community risk reduction would be smoke alarms. So if your plan is only to purchase the smoke alarms and give them out, as needed throughout the community and let them install it, that's not quite as high priority as the preceding bullet that you saw that says smoke alarm installation. It means that you actually purchase them and install them. What about your public education programs? What are you doing for community outreach? What are you doing for training? Training for your personnel on how to conduct life safety inspections and things like that. General prevention and awareness throughout your community, and then some targeted areas such as juvenile fire center and wildland fire prevention programs. So all these things are listed specifically in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, as eligible. They don't get the additional points, but again, they are eligible. The other thing that FEMA is very high on in the fire prevention things is performance metrics. So when you start talking about how you're going to analyze, how you're going to assess, how you're going to measure the success of your program, maybe you ought to be looking at how does it tie to the performance metrics that FEMA has identified. How will the program that you've identified and asked funding for reduce the number of fire incidents, reduce the number of fire deaths? What percentage of your population, the population that your community serves, will be trained in fire prevention and life safety? Or if you've identified a specific target population, maybe the juveniles, maybe the aged, the older folks, what percentage of those will be trained? How will you measure number of lives saved? How will you measure quality adjusted life years? Being able people to extend their life through better life-saving measures. So these are performance metrics that are going to become important when you start talking about how you're going to assess measure the success of your program. We'll kind of walk through the other ones. I said, you know, that the most important one is going to be that the community risk reduction measures, the community fire prevention. But again, code enforcement. Again, code enforcement has each one of these has its own priority. Priority in code enforcement is going to be to those projects that are for first time or reinstatement of some type of code adoption or code enforcement, including wildland urban interface. A little bit more emphasis on wildland urban interfaces. You'll see if you read through the NOFO, because of the last several years of the large number of wildland incidents in California and across the Midwest. Also eligible under code enforcement, assisted with the adoption or awareness that's now coming as existing codes, whereas the priority is given to new codes or reinstatement of codes, support to conducting inspections from a code enforcement perspective, and promotion of code enforcement throughout the community. The performance metrics that have been identified under code enforcement: decrease in fire loss, decrease in number of fires per 1,000 residents, decrease in fire deaths per 1,000 residents, and decrease in inspectable property structure fires with $25,000 loss. Fire and arson investigation is the third category. Priority is given to projects that aim to aggressively investigate every fire. Also eligible are costs for arson investigation trailers, arson investigator training, arson prevention training, educational materials, equipment, surveillance equipment, personnel costs, and media equipment. Looking at performance metrics there, increase in the percentage of fires where the cause is actually determined, and increase in number of arson arrests and conviction rates. National and state and regional programs, as I said, our main focus here this afternoon is going to be on applications by fire departments. But again, national, state, this is the fourth category under the fire prevention and safety there. Basically looking at projects that focus on residential fire issues or firefighter safety and wellness. And you can see what's on there. Again, you know, you're going to have organizations such as the National Volunteer Fire Council, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, International Association of Firefighters, all competing for dollars within these, because they do quite a bit looking at some of the issues such as cancer, mental wellness, physical fitness, things like that. A lot of these health and safety issues for firefighters are conducted through grants by these national organizations under this category. So you have those four categories. We need to think about how that plays out. Some additional point categories will be given to projects that serve the needs of people with disabilities, such as the hearing impaired or physically disabled. And so again, if you're applying under community risk reduction, and you know some number of your smoke alarms are going to be hearing impaired smoke alarms, then you should certainly mention that to get some additional point category. Again, if you're looking at maybe doing some life safety considerations for folks in assisted living centers, and what you're going to do in order to help them minimize slips, trips, and falls, or medical alert type systems, or smoke alarm systems and cooking and heating, then again you might mention that. And again, they're looking, do you have experience and expertise in similar programs? Is this the first time you're ever going to do fire prevention, or have you been doing fire prevention for 25 years, but you just want to extend beyond what you've been doing and want to request funding to kind of make things go better? So let's talk about the application process now. We're going to break down the application process. Let's start thinking about the tools that you need to start with. I mentioned several times the notice of funding opportunity. Those that have done these grant programs notice the NOFO, as we call it, is the rule book that tells you what's eligible, what's not eligible, who's not eligible, what type of programs they're looking for, where the priorities are, essentially the elements that I've listed previously there. And then it tells you how to apply. There's also some additional pages that you want to look at. The application checklist will kind of help you prepare your application before you submit it online. make sure that you get all the data elements that you need, you do the research that you need in order to complete that. And then self-evaluation sheet. Essentially is a scorecard that's used by the peer evaluators to determine whether your application should score higher than other applications. You can self-evaluate and score yourself to see, if I was reviewing this, how would I score myself? And then there's a list of frequently asked questions, because quite often if you have a question and you've asked it to FEMA, maybe somebody else has too. So it's good to look through those list of questions. And then one of the other things that's kind of nice is at the end of it, they have some success stories. I'm not going to go through those today, but those are always nice to say. Well, a lot of people say, especially when they start talking about the fire prevention and safety program, what kind of programs are good? What things can I ask for? What's worked for others? And so there are some success stories that are on the FEMA website, and it would behoove you to kind of look through those, to kind of look at that. And again, your one-stop shop is that FEMA.gov/firegrants to gain all this information. So let's just kind of understand a little bit about the technical aspects of applying for the grant. It's done online, FEMA.gov/firegrants. They recommend that you use Internet Explorer. Their interface, their electronic interface is designed around Internet Explorer. Sometimes other browsers will cause problems with that. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but I have seen where it does perform a little bit better using Internet Explorer. I'll also say, do not wait until the last day to submit. A lot of people kind of sit around and wait till, let's say, till the last week and says, oh, I got to get that grant application. I got to get that grant application in. Oh my gosh. And then what they find out is that a lot of the stuff is incomplete because they haven't done some of the research, they haven't got some of the data elements done, and they end up submitting an incomplete application. And when it gets to peer review, quite honestly, it doesn't tell the story that's needed in order to give a high score. So recommend that you work the narratives, and I'm going to talk about the narratives here just in a few minutes, in a word processing software. That way you can do things like spell check and move things around and get it formatted just the way you want it to before pasting that over into the application. Avoid trying to use fancy fonts because they all go away. Don't try to use special characters because they go away or they turn into some garbage. Just to try to use it in just plain text, but use the word processing software. Also gives you the advantage if you need to send it to somebody else to review it, kind of look over it, you've got a word processing copy of it that you could do that. So just a couple of technical notes that I caution you with. Just like any of the grant programs, if you worked in some of the grant programs, you'll need to know your federal employer identification number. You'll have to be registered and know your DUNS number, and you'll have to be registered and know your SAM number. So it's very important that you understand that. I kind of got a couple notes under SAM. I brought this up last month when we did the webinar for AFG. The new SAM process, when you apply for SAM, does require a notarized letter that says, yes, this is us, this is me, I am an authorized agent to use this SAM registration. They've actually had some instance of fraud in some of the grant programs, and now they're requiring a notarized letter from the organization that says, yes, you are authorized to be an agent for that SAM registration. The other thing I kind of caution people to is do it yourself. There are a lot of folks out there that kind of do searches of the internet and find people that are trying to apply for grants programs and say, for a fee, I can do your SAM registration. It's really not that difficult. It's not that difficult. Sometimes people get flustered because they don't understand what some things mean, but there's some help out there to help you with that process, and you can do it yourself, and you don't need to be going out there paying people to do your SAM registration for you. You can only submit one application, but that application can have 3 projects into it. So if you submit more than one application, all your applications are going to be deemed eligible because you violated that principle. But you may have one application that might have 2 projects into it. One, as my example there shows, it's a public education project, so you're going to explain the benefits of public education, what materials you're going to need to purchase in order to do that, how you're going to implement that, how you're going to evaluate that. And then the second one is that you want to have a smoke alarm distribution project. And so you're going to purchase a number of smoke alarms and maybe go out and do home safety inspections, install those smoke alarms. And so those are kind of distinct, separate projects, and you'll have its own set of narratives, and it'll be evaluated separately. It's not to say you can put everything under, general public safety and still do public education and do smoke alarms of it. You don't have to divide it into projects, but if you have major project activities, you might want to divide them up. There's really no guideline that says when things need to be divided into multiple projects and when everything could come under one single project. You have to be able to complete that within a 12-month period. Some of the national projects can go up to 24 months, but at least for us, looking at us as firefighters, as fire departments, our project has to be completed within a 12-month period from the time of grant award until the 12-month expiration of our grant award. There's also something, just those that apply for AFG understand there's something called a micro grant. Those are $25,000 or less of federal dollars. You can also apply for a micro grant under the Fire Prevention and Safety. And I don't know the exact percentage, but again, there are some benefits to doing a micro grant. If you have a small project, they do get some additional point consideration. They do get some consideration for a percentage of the dollars. So if you're in a small fire department with a small need, check the box that says micro grants. It'll certainly help you out in terms of the point scoring. It'll help you out in terms of the dollars that are shared, and I would encourage you to kind of look at that if you have a small project with a small dollar value. Some other things you need to think about that you're required to do. You are required, if you don't currently submit your fire reports into the NFIRS system, whether that be through your state system and then they get uploaded to NFIRS or whatever, you will, once you get the grant, you have to be able to report to that. That's the nationwide reporting system, and they want to make sure that the data is coming in. And especially since they're giving you grant dollars to reduce fire loss, they want to understand fire loss in your community. You have to be able to be compliant with NIMS. That should be not a problem for any of us in the fire department since 9/11 when the NIMS were there. Maintenance of effort. If you currently have fund and allocate $5,000 a year towards fire prevention efforts, you must continue to spend $5,000 maintenance of effort in fire prevention activities. You can't say that, well, I'm not going to spend it now because I got federal money. I can go spend that $5,000 somewhere else. You have to continue the efforts that you've done before, and these dollars now will supplement and allow you to do more. There is a cost share. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. That's basically 5%. And in some cases, if it really, that 5% creates an economic hardship, you can write and request a waiver for under the economic hardship factor to have that 5% waived. What do we mean by cost share? Again, for most of us, it's going to be 5%. Basically, you agree that if the federal government gives you $50,000 to complete your program, you're going to spend $2,500 of your own dollars to match that. And so it's certainly not a large amount, but again, it does kind of put you to have a stake in the game as well. That can be either cash or it can be in kind. And cost share by cash is going to be the easiest way because those are dollars, those are easily measurable. But if you're going to do in kind, such as the value of the services, the labor that you're putting out, the facilities that you're using, other services, other materials that you're going to put out, the equipment that you're using, you can say that we're matching that 5% through labor and material and equipment use. But you'll have to submit that to FEMA and have that approved. That has to be approved. You just can't make that claim on the application and they believe you. You actually will have to submit an application to have that there. That's why cash is easiest. Take the 5% and go with that. So who makes all this stuff up? Kind of say, where do these people get all this stuff from? And so I just want to kind of stop. There's something called a criteria development panel, and that's made up of the 9 major fire service organizations across the United States, National Volunteer Fire Council being one of those, that meet on an annual basis to talk about what are the priorities, what are the changes in the criteria that we need to think about in the coming year. In fact, we'll be meeting in December to talk about any changes in priorities or criteria that we believe are necessary for the fiscal year 19 program, next year's program. So we always look for feedback. If there's any feedback from departments across the United States, shoot us a note and say, hey, I've applied for a grant under AFG or SAFER or FP&S for the last 3 years and get turned down because, pretty red balloons aren't a high priority. Just kind of make it simple, And I think they should be a high priority because of this. And we'll evaluate that. And if we feel that your concerns are necessary, we take that to the criteria development. So that's kind of where, that's a good thing is that, the fire service is making the priorities. FEMA is not making them. They're working on our recommendations, and they generally accept our recommendations. When it comes down to evaluating your applications, again, FEMA's not evaluating your evaluations, but those same 9 fire service organizations send people to peer panels in order to evaluate and score everybody's applications. We'll be going up to a undisclosed location in January for AFG, and then probably in February, March, we'll be looking at fire prevention and safety as well as SAFER applications. Once we make our evaluations through the peer panels, then they go back to FEMA, and they've got some folks that are under contract that serve as a technical evaluation panel, and they're going to look at the score and the comments from the peer panel reviews, as well as the cost information. If you say you want 100 smoke alarms and they cost $850 a piece, obviously they're going to know that smoke alarms don't cost $850 a piece, and they're going to adjust your application accordingly. So let's think about the narrative. The narrative is with most of these grant programs is the most important part of your application. And so, FEMA wants you to be able to kind of think about, what's the best strategy for you to increase safety in your community against fire and fire-related hazards. And a lot of that together is based upon understanding your risk, coming back to that step 1. What is the risk? What is the risk in your community? How is your community vulnerable to that risk? And then think about how you're gonna take action to reduce that risk, reduce that vulnerability. And so when it's scored, here's the scoring of your application. It's very important. Your narratives, basically 5 narratives that you'll write, and we'll walk through each one of these. But 10% of your narrative is based on financial need, why you need the money. 25% of it is based on understanding what the vulnerability is. What is the risk? What is the vulnerability in your community? And do you understand that? Then 25% is how you're going to implement a solution to address that vulnerability. And then 25% how you're going to evaluate your program to determine success. And then is this a good use of federal dollars, cost benefit? How is this going to benefit your community? How is this a wise use of grant dollars? That's 10%. And remember I said that each one of those had funding priorities. Each one of those, such as Community There, that was the actual installation of smoke alarms, sprinkler awareness. Each one of those had a funding priority. And again, that's 5%. So, if you're not in one of the priority categories, you still can score up to 95%, let's say, by looking at the rest of the scoring factors. But that if you're in one of those priority areas, then that's additional 5% towards your scoring. So let's kind of walk through this. Financial need. Financial need narrative basically said, why is it that you can't do this without the assistance of federal dollars? What does your operational budget look like, including providing a high level of the budget? I often tell people, just as I did in the AFG webinar, that you should actually solicit. Here's my income, comes from this amount If I have a $50,000 a year budget, then $30,000 of it a year comes from our local government provides us that, and 15% comes from fundraising, and 5,000 of it comes from local donations. And then here's how I spend that $50,000. So much of it for equipment maintenance, so much of it for utilities, so much of it for fuel, so much of it for insurance, so much of it for supplies and materials. And at the end of the day, I've got $2.50 left out of that $50,000 or something. There's no way that I can support this fire prevention program or any other major purchase on the existing budget. And the last bullet is, I tried to go to our local government and ask them for more money, and they said, no, we're under a cap. We cannot give you any more money. We tried to do some additional fundraising in our communities, and what we found out is that the money's just not there. They were unsuccessful. It cost us more to put on the fundraising activity than it did we made. We actually lost money. So in your financial need, you want to kind of clarify those things. Why do you need federal dollars? What does your current budget look like? And what else have you tried to do in order to do that? We went to local businesses and tried to get them to give some donations towards this fire prevention program, and they didn't have the dollars to give us. And so when this is analyzed and assessed by the peer reviewers, here's the question. Does the applicant explain in great detail why they're unable to fund a project without federal assistance, and the description how the organization of the functions of the organization are affected? Did they describe their efforts to secure the funding from other sources? So again, those questions that I showed you on the previous slide, these are the questions that the peer reviewers, when the peer panelists sit down with your application in front of them, these are the questions that they will have to answer, yes or no. The second part of that, again, looking at the 25% of it being your vulnerability statement. So your narrative should be clear on these items. Did you do either an informal or a formal risk assessment to understand the vulnerability, i.e. risk, that the project will address? And what are the characteristics of your area? What are the local statistics in terms of fire and life safety issues? And what steps did you take in order to determine who is vulnerable and how they're vulnerable throughout your community? Just a couple definitions. What is vulnerability? That's a weak link. That's something that affects us from not being able to complete our life safety mission because of either high risk behaviors, living conditions, things like that. Formal risk assessment is using some software programs or expert analysis. You've hired somebody to come in and do a formal risk assessment, but that's not necessary. You could do an informal risk assessment. An informal risk assessment is easy as looking at your own data, i.e. your NFIRS data, your run statistics, determine that, what is your fire loss? What is your injury and death rate due to fire loss? What are the cause and origins of that fire? Are there specific areas in your community more vulnerable than others? And so you can do that in an informal risk assessment. You don't need to go out and have fancy software. You don't have to go out and hire experts in order to do this. But if you have those, so much the better. You have a formal risk assessment. So here's the questions. These questions, again, are going to reflect right back to the items that I said should be clear in your narrative. Did the applicant clearly summarize the vulnerability that this project will address? Does the applicant describe the steps that were used to determine the vulnerability and how the target population was identified? Does the applicant use local statistics, not national statistics, local statistics that support their project and their target audience? Then your next thing, implementation plan. How are you going to solve this vulnerability? And so you should have a list of goals and objectives that this project's going to complete, and then examples of how you're going to do marketing and outreach. Remember we talked earlier about the importance of partnerships, right? And so partnerships are important here. So some examples of how you're going to market this program, how you're going to do outreach, who you're going to partner with, what are the deliverables and materials that you're going to have, and how you're going to distribute those, and who's going to take care of that? Is that going to be the fire department, or is that going to be the schools? Is it going to be the churches? Is it going to be the homeowners associations? And then if you're requesting specific props, then what are you going to specifically use as goals and measurement frequency use? There was a time going back 10, 15 years ago where everyone thought that their solution to fire prevention was to buy a fire prevention safety trailer. And I think if we parked all of the ones that were purchased through FEMA grants, we could have probably gone bumper to bumper across the United States. Those are kind of looked down a little bit now. Not that they're not important, but too often people just says, I need a life safety trailer, without saying, well, what is the vulnerability that this is going to serve? How often are you going to use it? How's it going to address your vulnerability? How's it going to meet the goals and objectives? And it's more so much that the prop is wrapped around a program, as opposed to you're going to build a program around the prop. And so the program comes first, the prop is just to support the program. And so it's very important that you kind of understand the difference there. When this is assessed by the peer reviewers, this comes off the assessment list. Again, these questions come right back to the things that I'd mentioned to you just previously on the previous slide that ought to be in your narrative. Does the applicant have an implementation plan that describes their goals and objectives? Does the applicant give details on marketing efforts, i.e. partnerships, right? Do they explain the project milestones? What's going to happen in this 12 months? What are we going to be able to do from the time we get a grant award to the first 30 days, to the first 90 days, to 6 months down the road, to 9 months down the road, to finally at the end? And then maybe kind of think about how you're going to sustain it beyond that 12-month period. Is this going to be a 12-month push and then you give up onto it? And so again, if there are things that you want to think about beyond that, how you're going to sustain it within your own department, that once you get it started, and you get the support, you show the initiative, and hopefully at that point maybe get some government or corporate support behind it to continue the program beyond just 12 months. Because life safety is not a 12-month job; it's a lifetime job. And then looking at how you're going to evaluate it. How are you going to evaluate the project? You should have an evaluation project. How are you going to measure the effectiveness? How are you going to identify that you've got the reach you have? How have you changed behaviors in the community? How have you reduced fire loss? How have you reduced fire injuries in your community? So, what kind of assessment tools are you going to use in order to measure that this has been done? Is it going to be informal surveys? Is it going to be, observations that you're able to do by actually going out and do field studies? Is it going to be as simple as looking through your fire loss data for the next 12 months after the program has been completed? And so the peer reviewers are going to ask these questions when they review your application. Does the applicant have a project plan with measurable goals, and how they're going to measure how they're going to determine the effectiveness of the project? Do they have a methodology for measuring the success? How are they going to gather that information? And how does it relate to the proposed project? How will it reduce fire loss? How is it going to mitigate the risk and vulnerability that you identified back in step 1? And then finally, cost benefit. Last part of the scoring there. Criteria: is this the best bang for the buck for federal dollars? How will your community benefit? How will you maximize the level of funding? So make it clear that this is the best cost-effective solution for that for federal dollars. And so the assessment, the peer reviewers are going to look at, do they show that this is going to be a high benefit for the community given a reasonable amount of cost? Are these costs reasonable for the targeted population? Am I spending, $300,000 for a community of 2,000 people? It's probably not reasonable, right? So is this a reasonable cost for the target population that's going to be reached? And do they provide justification for the budget items related to the cost? So these are the questions that are going to be asked. Funding priorities. Remember we talked earlier when I talked about that, which each one of those categories has things that are funding priorities. And so they're going to look at, did this proposed project meet the funding priority for that category? And again, it's not, as I said there, it's not a qualifier or a disqualifier. Five percentage points are awarded to projects that do meet that. So it just kind of means you plus or minus 5 points when you go through that. Don't let that discourage you from going for other programs. If you've got ideas out there, then by all means go for that. But remember that there is five percentage points available increase in your score if you are in one of those priority categories. I mentioned earlier about having success stories, and I'm not going to go through that. I started when I was putting this together. I was looking at maybe picking a few of them out, but I wanted to just kind of leave this with you that you can go to the grant webpage at FEMA.gov/firegrants and look at what some departments across the United States have done in applying FP&S grant funding to get some ideas, because there's a lot of good ideas and a lot of good initiatives out there, and certainly worth considering. So I'm done, actually about 15 minutes early, which gives us plenty of time for questions. So I do have one question that came up. It says, what is the likelihood of getting approved for Sparky and Smokey costume? Again, I believe they can be done, but one of the things that you need to consider is that what is the program, and not so much focus on the props, having the Sparky costume, the Smokey costume out there, but what are you going to do, and how are these props going to support that program? So it should be the program first, the prop second. And again, a lot of the applications that failed in this category talk about how important it is to get a Sparky costume so that they can do fire prevention. Well, what's that mean? What is the risk? What's the vulnerability? How is your department going to address it? And then you want to get to the kids first, then this is, you're going to relate to something the kids understand. So therefore you're going to put them in an environment that they understand. I recall that this is my my contact information right there. I would be more than happy to send you a printed copy of this presentation if it's of help. Remember to look at the NOFO, and we certainly have some more time for questions. Brian, we answered your question, and Brittany, thank you for your positive feedback. Anybody else with questions? Please go to the Q&A button there and feel free to type in, because everybody's muted, so you have to type it in through the Q&A area. Matt, I'm not getting any more questions here unless you see some.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any either, Dave. I guess we can give everybody another minute or so if they want to type in some questions. We'll certainly take them as they come in. All right, there's a couple more coming in now, Dave.
Okay. Does the grant qualify for personnel? Again, you can put personnel costs in there. Again, read through the NOFO, specific requirements there on how you can put personnel costs in there, but certainly it is qualified if those are necessary in order to support the program. So yeah, if you do have to, if you do have to use, either paid firefighters that you're going to do that on off regular shift hours, and you need to supplement their income, or if you need to somehow pay specialists or do contracting to do some different things, you can pay for that. Again, read the provisions of the NOFO there. Chris wants to know what a SAM number is. Okay, all federal grant programs work under something called the System for Award Management. So that's a registration that registers you as a recipient of federal dollars. Let's put it that way. So the first part of that is to have a DUNS number. You have to get the DUNS number, and then you have to register within SAM, sam.gov. And there's some information on the FEMA website as well as in the NOFO how you apply for the SAM registration. Very important that whatever you put in the DUNS, you do the same thing in SAM. I've actually had departments that put on the Wise Owl volunteer fire department under Dunn's, and then when they go to do the SAM, they just put Wise Owl Fire Department, leaving the word volunteer out, and it's going to say we can't match your registration because the two pieces don't match. So it's important that those pieces do equate. So anybody that receives federal dollars has to be registered within Dunn's and SAM. I teach for the National Fire Academy, so I have a SAM number. Robert wants to know priority, and there might be first-time code enforcement. Again, if your local laws, regulations have changed for codes, whether it be for sprinklers, whether it be certain types of building construction, what you might have to, what they may have to do for codes in lightweight construction, new smoke alarm registration, and again, if you're doing some things in that category, then you need to consider you can consider that as well. So, trying to scan through the NOFO here and see if it says anything different than that. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for your comment.
All right, Dave, we got two more questions via the chat function.
Okay.
The first is, what is the fiscal year timeline for matching costs?
Fiscal year timeline for matching costs. Well, the 12-month award period goes from the time you're awarded. So let's talk. We're currently in the application period. It won't close till the end of December. Awards won't be coming out till probably March, April, May at best. So again, you kind of look at that there. So you know, the fiscal year is defined as you. I mean, again, you know, somewhere in that 12-month period, you know, which may cross the fiscal year, government fiscal boundary, the federal fiscal boundaries. So, you know, your dollars may come out of, you know, fiscal year. We're in fiscal year 19 now, even though this is fiscal year 18 money. So it's not saying that you got to spend fiscal year 18 money for the match, because fiscal year 18 is behind all of us. So it, you know, somewhere within the 12-month award period, you know, you provide the matching costs. Tony wants to know, what is the best FP&S projects besides smoke alarms? Again, looking at your targeted population, and you know, where are they vulnerable? Portable fire extinguishers certainly would be there. Address signs would be there. All those things, sure they are. You know, they, again, just because, remember what I said about things being priority, the smoke alarm installations is a priority. There's certainly, the other things are eligible, and you should not exclude them, because the examples you put there, providing portable fire extinguishers, because maybe, you know, especially in elderly homes, the kitchen fires and the unattended heat cooking on the stove, you know, if we provide them the little 2.5-pound extinguishers, you know, for life safety, would be a good thing. Reflective address signs, I've seen them all over there. So good question, Tony, and yes, those would be eligible. Again, you know, you kind of look at some of the success stories that FEMA's put on the website, would give you some examples as well.
All right, Dave, we've got one more question in the Q&A. Actually, two more. Another one just popped up.
Yeah.
Sherry asked, would a grant request for funding site assessments for wildland urban interface risk reduction be likely?
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what that question refers to, but certainly wildland urban interface issues have been determined to be a high priority because of the wildland incidents that have occurred. I'm not sure what she means by a funding site assessment. Site assessment, I guess, is what she's in. You know, again, if you're looking at doing the risk assessment, having somebody come out and do a survey of the area, you know, if you serve, let's just say, 100 square mile area, and a lot of it's heavily wooded, and you want to contract somebody to come out and do a risk assessment of that area, and come up with specific recommendations, such as piggybacking on the FireWise program by forestry and things like that, in order to give your community some specific recommendations in terms of, how far to cut back on shrubbery and things that may be in their community, things like that. Then you could, that the risk assessment, was one of the 3 priority areas. So you called it site assessment. I'm calling it a risk assessment. Brian wants to know if you could ask for more than one type of item in the grant to boost fire. Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, you can have, you can have literature, you can have smoke alarms, you can have, what other things you want. You can also, again, you could all have multiple project activities if things are clearly distinguished between, one part is general community awareness and one part is smoke alarm installation, and you want to divide them into separate projects, then yes. And if you wanted to apply under, one project under community risk reduction and one under code enforcement, then yeah, those would be separate projects. One under community risk reduction and one and a separate project under code. Remember, I had the 4 project areas that were up there earlier. These 4 project areas. So you could have, you could have separate projects. You could have one project under community risk reduction, and you could have a second project under code enforcement. Jeff, yes, if you spot me an email, my email address is right there on the slide on the screen. Spot me an email, and I'd be glad to send you a copy of the presentation. Chris says, is it better to have more projects listed in the grant or try to have one? There's really no clear distinction, Chris. Again, it talks about, I think, one project really for most of us is going to be sufficient. It says, you can have multiple projects. The only way I would say you'd have multiple projects, the best way would be, again, coming back to this slide that I had earlier. If you have a specific project under community risk reduction and you have maybe a separate project for code enforcement or even fire and arson investigation, one of those 3, which is what the fire department's going to be, then you may have more projects in one. But I could, a peer reviewer sits in a room for 8 hours a day or more, and the more you had to read, the more tired your eyes get, the more tired your brain gets. So I always tell people to keep it simple, keep it straight and forward. So if you lump your needs into one project, you're probably better off. An application hits a table and has 2 projects, people start rolling their eyes already and says, oh, now I got 2 of them in this, or I got 3 of them in this one. So one is better than more. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your comment, Jeff. And I don't see any more, Matt.
All right, great. If nobody has any more questions, the NVFC would like to thank all of those who attended and Mr. David Lewis for another great presentation. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and at nvfc.org in the near future. Notice of the recording's availability will be made via NVFC's Facebook and Twitter accounts. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.